Hunting on Illuminated Shores. Part 1. The Torchlight Parade. The eastern seaboard of the United States, January 1942, was a party. After the shock of Pearl Harbor, a defiant, almost frenetic energy pulsed through the coastal cities. The blackout orders, issued by a distant, nervous military command, were treated as suggestions at best, laughable inconveniences at worst. Mayors and Chamber of Commerce officials argued that darkening the glittering skylines of Miami Beach, Atlantic City, or New York would be bad for morale and worse for business. So, the lights blazed. On the warm, moonlit night of January 19th, the ocean off Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, was a sheet of black glass, crisscrossed by the shimmering golden highways of light spilling from the shore. From the conning tower of U-123, Captain Lieutenant Reinhard Hartigan inhaled the salt air, a predator's smile playing on his lips. It was, he would later write in his log, ein Wunschtraum, a dream wish. Before him, silhouetted with impossible clarity against the glow of the coastal towns, was a procession of fat, slow-moving merchant ships. They sailed alone, without escort, their running lights on like polite guests at a dinner party. There was no zigzagging, no attempt at stealth. It was as if the war was a distant rumor. Fahrer, bring uns näher. Ziel ist der große Tanker dort. Helmsman, bring us closer. Target is the large tanker there. Hartigan's voice was calm. The orders from Admiral Dönitz for Operation Paukenschlag, drumbeat, had been clear. Strike the American coast with maximum audacity. But even Dönitz could not have imagined this. The Americans were offering themselves up. The targeted ship was the SS Alan Jackson, a Panamanian-flagged tanker laden with 72,000 barrels of crude oil from Colombia. It was a floating bomb, its profile etched in fire against the glow of Morehead City. Hartigan gave the order. 2 G7E electric torpedoes streaked from the bow tubes. The wait was seconds. Then, a bloom of orange fire so bright it momentarily washed out the shorelights, followed by a deep, rolling whoomp that carried across the water. The Alan Jackson was ripped apart. The sea ignited. A towering column of black smoke, backlit by the burning oil, climbed into the starry sky. Men leaped into a water that was itself on fire. On shore, the explosion rattled windows in the sleepy town of Buxton. People rushed to the beaches. What they saw was not a tragedy at sea, but a spectacle. The burning tanker, a colossal torch 2 miles out, lit up the night. Flames danced 100 feet in the air, reflecting off the gentle surf. Some thought it was a shipboard accident. Others, with a creeping dread, began to understand. But the authorities, fearful of causing panic, offered little information. The next day's local paper buried the story on page 4. For Hartigan and the other U-boat commanders of the first happy time off America, it was a hunter's paradise. They called it Die zweite glückliche Zeit, the second happy time, a grim echo of their early successes in the North Atlantic. They operated with near impunity. American anti-submarine warfare was in its infancy, coordinated by a dysfunctional mix of Navy, Coast Guard, and Army commands who communicated poorly and had almost no experience. There were no convoys. A handful of outdated Coast Guard cutters and civilian yachts pressed into service were no match for the Type 9 U-boats. Night after night, the slaughter continued. U-123E crept south, following the current of the Gulf Stream, a warm, deep highway that also conveniently backlit shipping. Off Jacksonville, then down the coast of Florida. Here, the surreal reached its peak. The beachfront resorts of Miami were a neon fantasia. The grand hotels, the Roni Plaza, the Flamingo, blazed with light, their palm trees spotlit. Orchestras played on open-air terraces. Couples strolled the illuminated boardwalks, cocktails in hand. And just beyond the line of surf, sometimes so close that the smell of diesel and burning metal carried on the breeze, the U-boats hunted. Hartigan, lying off Miami Beach, watched the glittering city through his attack periscope. He could see the headlights of cars on the coastal highway, the glow of street lamps. He lined up a target, a tanker chugging south, perfectly framed by the lights of the shore. The torpedo hit. Another fiery cauldron erupted, this one so close that the music from the hotels momentarily stopped, and the bathers on the beach the next morning would find sticky black tar balls washed up at the high tide line. The U-boat captains joked darkly that they could read the names of the ships by the light of the cities they were about to sink. It wasn't warfare. It was shooting fish in a barrel, illuminated by the fish themselves. Part 2. The Beachcombers of War. The carnage shifted north with the seasons. By the spring of 1942, the U-boats, emboldened beyond belief, were prowling off the Jersey Shore and Long Island. The vacation season was approaching, and the lights of Atlantic City's famous boardwalk, a mile-long ribbon of electricity, amusement rides, and saltwater taffy stands, made for an unbeatable backdrop. In the small coastal town of Avon-by-the-Sea, New Jersey, young Danny Riley, 16 and restless, found the war not in newsreels, but on his doorstep. His father, a disabled WWI vet, had gotten him a job as a night watchman for a beachfront hotel that had closed for the season. His duty was to patrol the empty verandas, to watch for vandals. What he watched instead was a nightly naval battle. From the third-floor porch, Danny had a panoramic view of the Black Ocean, its horizon defined by the faint, sickly glow of New York City to the north. He kept a cheap pair of binoculars and a notebook. At first, the distant flashes and subsequent fires were confusing. Then, one clear April night, he saw it all unfold with terrifying clarity. A large ship, its outline sharp against the distant glow, was steaming north. Suddenly, a brilliant white flash erupted amidships, followed seconds later by the deep-throated boom. The ship listed, then a secondary explosion tore it apart, sending a fireball rolling into the sky. For the next hour, Danny watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the ship burned. He saw tiny, dark specks lifeboats, he hoped, pulling away from the flames. He saw the silhouette of something low and dark in the water near the dying ship, a shape that slid away without lights. The U-boat. It had to be. The next morning, he bicycled down to the beach. The tide had brought in the war. A slick of oil, rainbowed and foul-smelling, coated the sand. Scattered amidst the seaweed were wooden crates with stenciled German writing, a single leather life jacket with a Norwegian label, and a perfectly intact sealed jar of plum jam from England. Further down, a group of men in Coast Guard uniforms were solemnly lifting a body from the surf, covering it with a gray blanket. The war was no longer abstract. It delivered its dead to your summer playground. Danny started his own private coast watch. He noted times, directions, the color of the explosions. He knew the local police chief, an old family friend named O'Malley, and shyly showed him the notebook. O'Malley, a veteran of the Great War, looked at the boy's meticulous entries. May 4th, 11:37 p.m., large explosion bearing 110 degrees, lasting fire for approx 2 hours, oil slick S Beach AM. And his face grew grim. He took the notebook to the newly established Harried Auxiliary Naval Control Office in Asbury Park. They were dismissive at first. A kid's fantasy. But the dates and times correlated with confirmed sinkings. Danny was brought in, not as a witness, but as a resource. A young, keen-eyed naval intelligence officer, Susan Wright, one of the few women in such a role, assigned due to the sheer desperation of the situation, interviewed him. She saw his raw data for what it was, a ground-level view of a strategic disaster. "Do you know how to use a telegraph key, son?" she asked. He didn't. "You're going to learn." Danny, along with a handful of other volunteers, lighthouse keepers, retired fishermen, other night watchmen, became the unlikeliest link in a nascent early warning system. They were given codes, strict radio silence protocols, and old commercial radio sets modified for a specific frequency. Danny's post remained the hotel veranda. But now, next to his binoculars and notebook, sat a heavy black telegraph key. His instructions were simple. Sight a submarine or an attack, send the coded position. Do not engage. Do not draw attention. One night in late May, he saw it. Not an explosion, but the sleek, whale-back shape of a U-boat, surfacing not 3 miles out, its conning tower a stark black cutout against the Milky Way. It was recharging its batteries, utterly fearless. Danny's heart hammered against his ribs. He fumbled with the code sheet, his fingers cold. He tapped out the brief message. Avon Post, bearing 095, 3 miles U-boat surfaced. He repeated it twice, as instructed. For 20 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. The U-boat sat there, a malevolent insect on the water. Then, from the north, he heard the deep drone of aircraft engines. A lumbering PBY Catalina, based out of Sandy Hook, appeared, guided by his signal. It dropped a string of depth charges in a line across the spot where the submarine had been. The sea erupted in massive geysers. The U-boat had crash-dived just in time. No kill was confirmed. But it was the first time Danny had seen a reaction, a fight back. The hunter had been hunted, if only for a moment. The light from the depth charge explosions had been different from the fires of the tankers. A cold, white, purposeful violence. He had made a difference. The war had arrived on the illuminated shores, and now the people on those shores were starting to fight back. Part 3. The dimming of the lights. The turning point was slow, bloody, and bureaucratic. The staggering losses finally forced a reckoning. In Washington, Admiral Ernest King, stubborn and slow to act, was finally bludgeoned by the statistics. Over 3 million tons of shipping lost in 6 months off the U.S. coast, thousands of lives, much of it within sight of land. The pressure from the British, who had learned the convoy lesson in blood, became unbearable. The first, most visible change was the one the cities had resisted: the blackout. It was no longer a request. In June 1942, the Eastern Sea Frontier Command mandated it. Civilian defense wardens, often veterans like Danny's father, patrolled the streets, yelling at any sliver of light showing from a curtain. The great coastal cities were plunged into an unfamiliar darkness. The neon of Miami Beach died. The boardwalk of Atlantic City became a ghostly, silent pier. The glow that had backlit the slaughter was extinguished. For the U-boat commanders, it was like a spotlight being switched off. The target-rich environment was still there, but now it was hidden in a cloak of gloom. Navigation and targeting became infinitely harder. More crucial was the implementation of the interlocking convoy system, KNs, Key West to New York, and NYs, New York to Guantanamo. Merchant ships, those stubborn, independent lifelines of democracy, were forced to gather in protected anchorages and sail together, shepherded by a growing fleet of destroyers, destroyer escorts, and corvettes. The U.S. Navy's schoolhouse for anti-submarine warfare, once a backwater, became a frantic hub of activity. New technologies rushed into service. Improved sonar, ASDIC, better depth charges, the Hedgehog spigot mortar. The U-boats of the Second Happy Time found the hunting grounds suddenly lethal. The U-123K, Hartigan's boat, experienced this shift firsthand. On a July night off Virginia, now in utter darkness, he stalked what he thought was a lone freighter. As he closed for the kill, a destroyer escort, the USS Green, materialized out of the gloom, its radar-guided searchlight pinning the U-boat in a blinding beam. Depth charges rained down before Hartigan could fully dive. The boat was rocked violently, instruments shattered, and a critical leak sprang in the engine room. They escaped, limping back to Brest with a shattered crew and a newfound respect. The free ride was over. On shore, Danny Riley's role evolved. The telegraph key was replaced by a telephone hotline to a central plotter in Asbury Park. His sightings became rarer as the U-boats were pushed further out to sea. The Beachcombers' war yielded different treasures, no longer jars of jam or life jackets, but practice shells from Navy gunnery exercises and the occasional mine that had broken loose from a defensive field, washed up to be diffused by weary, sand-covered engineers. The final act of the coastal drama was not a battle, but a salvage operation. In the summer of 1942, the tanker SS Robert E. Lee, torpedoed and sinking off the mouth of the Mississippi, was towed into the shallows near Gulfport. A team of hard-hat divers, the underwater equivalent of battlefield surgeons, worked for weeks in the murk, patching the hull, pumping out oil, refloating her. She sailed again. It was a symbol. America was no longer just a victim on its own shores. It was learning, adapting, fighting back, and saving what it could. By the end of 1942, the second happy time was a memory for the Kriegsmarine. The U-boats were in a desperate, losing battle of attrition in the mid-Atlantic. The illuminated shores had been a temporary anomaly, a grotesque interlude made possible by a lethal combination of American unpreparedness and arrogance. For Danny, who would join the Navy in 1944, the memories of those nights on the veranda never faded. The spectacular, awful beauty of the burning ships, the quiet horror of the morning debris, the frantic tapping of the telegraph key. He had witnessed the moment when the war came home, not as a rallying cry, but as a series of flames on the horizon. And he had seen his country, sluggish and overconfident, get punched in the face, stagger, wipe the blood from its mouth, and finally learn to hit back. The lesson, written in fire on the water and paid for in thousands of lives, was simple and brutal. No front is ever truly home, and in modern war, the lights must sometimes go out so that the darkness can become a shield and not just a hunting blind for the enemy.